Well, thanks for joining us today for our webinar on the impact of technology on the developing brain. I'm very excited to hear the content today, and I'm going to just turn it over to our Early Start Project Director, Karen Bohal Ortega. Karen, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Debbie. Okay, so I am very excited to have you guys on today. This is actually something that I think about a lot and talk about a lot, and it is from kind of two lenses, I guess actually three. Most of the folks know that I've worked in early childhood for a long time. I was a teacher in preschools with a big emphasis on infant and toddlers. And then I actually became an administrator in preschools and then went back and got my master's and went the clinical route. And so I'm actually a licensed clinician, and I went into schools working as an early childhood mental health consultant, supporting preschools. And so a lot of times I would have questions from teachers, or I myself as a teacher had questions about the impact of technology coming from when I was born. A lot of folks think that I've grown up in technology, but I actually am right on the cusp. I got my first phone when I got into college, and I remember in high school they just started teaching all of the computer science classes. So technology, with that being said, it's interesting to me because technology is such a new field. You know, when we think about a lot of the things that have existed in society, we've had in some form a lot of things for centuries, but technology actually has only been around for about 30, 40 years at most. And it actually wasn't very accessible to folks until I would say late 90s, early 2000s in the way that we see it now. And it's emerging all the time. So with that, you know, technology is something that we're still learning about. We haven't had research over the lifespan of anyone to this point because it hasn't been around that long. So we continue to learn more and more all the time. But we do, now that it's been about 20, 30 years that we've seen it in the forms that it is now, we're able to kind of see some of the lasting impacts that it has on development for children into at least young adulthood. You know, when Debbie and I were talking right before this started about, you know, from a parent perspective, this was something that I thought a lot about when my son was born. You know, how much was I going to expose him to? Was I going to let him watch TV? All of these things. And, you know, I have some friends who work in the tech industry, and there was this one time I had a discussion with my friend, and I said, you know, I really want Santi to build things. I want him to be creative. I want him to use magnet tiles and Lincoln Logs and Legos. And he looked at me, he works in marketing and he's a computer whiz. And he said, well, why can't technology be creative? Why can't Santi explore apps and explore the computer and do things that are creative? I mean, that's essentially what a graphic designer is, or someone who builds a website. And so that actually opened me up a lot to really saying, you know, I think I need to reconsider this and also see, you know, technology is not just something that gets in the way of relationships or something that isn't super interactive. There are a lot of advantages, and I think that I'm looking from one perspective and I need to broaden it a bit. So that's a little bit from me. So here we go. And Deb and I always talk about how the first slide kind of sits there for a second. So, okay, so I didn't want to go too much into the brain because I imagine a lot of folks have some basic understanding, but I did want to talk a bit about brain development. You know, in the first 5 years, especially the first 3 years of a child's life, it is the most crucial time in terms of brain development. Never in our lifespan will we have as much development of the brain as we do in those first 3 years. And I put this in for you guys, as many as 1 million new neural connections can happen each second. It's amazing to think about the complexities of the brain and such a small space in our head, but yet so much is happening. And one of the things that we think about, that we need to think about, is neural connections. They not only, they happen based on experiences, but there's a process of actually strengthening them throughout that. So the child's brain grows as they experience sensations. So as they see things, as they feel things, so that tactile touch, as they taste things, smell things, babies innately put things in their mouth. That's a way of exploring and experiencing things. And that's actually strengthening the neural connections within their brain so that they can store things and say, when I taste this or I touch this item, they can categorize it in their brain and store it away, store that memory so that they can pull up that information later on in a quicker and faster way. So like I was saying, also the repetition, how many times that a child experiences things helps strengthen the connection. It helps us learn for the future. And most of you guys have probably heard this phrase that neurons that fire together wire together. So things that consistently occur together will wire your brain to strengthen those connections to occur more often. One of the things that I want to think about when I talked about experiences, so experiences help make new neural connections. A lot of our families that we're supporting have experiences that might be very different from other families. So if we think about a child who has a special healthcare need or is constantly going to the doctor or has a NICU experience where they maybe weren't, they were surrounded by machines and things like that, it's not necessarily in any way going to negatively impact a child, but it will impact them. And so I just want to point that kind of stuff out, is that we need to be very cognizant of experiences that happen to children at all ages, but especially in these first 3 years of their life. Even if a lot of times there's this video that Safe and Sound, I believe, puts out where they think, the child who is old enough to talk about something that happened or to really understand a situation is impacted the most, but actually younger children are impacted the most because they have a lot of they have a lot of somatic memory. So even though a little child doesn't necessarily understand fully what's happening, they're still creating neural connections in their head and they're still having a somatic experience. So if a child in the Safe and Sound video, a baby is witnessing domestic violence, and one of the things that they're trying to show from the video is that the baby actually is more impacted by the 2 or 3 year old because they can't make sense of everything, but their body is still bringing in a memory through their brain, and their brain is connecting it in certain ways. So if an infant who has experienced who experiences and witnesses consistent domestic violence is actually strengthening those neural connections to have memories and to solidify those memories from those experiences more than if they were an older child who could talk and kind of reason and understand a bit more. Sorry, I kind of went into a little ramble right there, but that's something I wanted to point out because I do think that our children experience things slightly differently depending on their circumstances, and so we really need to keep those in mind. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the advantages of technology, because technology, like I said, initially I'm a therapist, and so I think that people should be face-to-face and develop these relationships, and I absolutely believe in that, but I do believe that there are a lot of advantages to technology. So one of the things, it enhances children's interest and interaction with content. There's a lot of times that you're sitting in a group with people and you might ask a question, and then we say, oh, let me Google it. And so we get on our phones and we look it up and we get all of this information about the topic. It's the same with kids. It's similar to books, but now we have it at our fingertips on a phone. It can complement children's visual and auditory learning styles. We talk a lot too about everyone learns differently. Some people learn by seeing, some people learn by hearing, some people learn by doing. When we have access to technology, not only are we sometimes hearing things, but we're seeing it. That's why people do PowerPoints. That's why we're on this webinar, because you're getting it in two folds. You're getting the auditory and you're also getting the visual for it. And technology is allowing us to be here today. So it definitely can complement children as well. I think it helps develop curiosity and problem solving. There's a lot of times that there's something that we want to know at home, and my son Santi will ask a question, and like I said before, sometimes we'll Google it, sometimes there's an app or a video or things, because I can't explain everything. I don't know everything, and so sometimes there's things that we can find online that really help him to understand a bit more. He's super into volcanoes right now, and so we have utilized technology a lot to explain eruption and to explain lava versus magma and all these things. And so it's absolutely helped to broaden things for Santiago. And it allows for more modes of communication. I think that that's absolutely something to consider for the kids that we work with, especially if we're working as kids get older, if they're nonverbal. They have access to using devices to help communicate. Debbie and I were also talking about the ability to communicate using FaceTime or video chat. That is huge for families who are separated, whether it be a family member traveling or an extended family living somewhere else. I had a friend in college who actually was doing an internship where she was working at the Chowchilla Women's Prison, and she was doing a project where they would sit down with moms who are separated from their children, and they would actually they would record the moms reading a book to their child, and then they would deliver that book to their child to strengthen that relationship and connection. And so to me, that is a wonderful way to use technology for people who are separated and aren't able to be with each other. And when I forgot to mention this when I was talking about complements children's visual learning styles, that is actually the #1 preference that most people have, is for visually presented information. And so it's interesting to think about how often we talk, but talking is actually not the preference that most people have in terms of receiving information, is that verbal communication. Visually presented information is actually most people's preference, and actually is most supported in terms of a learning style for folks. And let's see. Yeah. And then it improves access to information. We were talking about that as well. Just that if there's something that I want to know, it's much easier to go online and to Google something than when I was growing up and you had to go to the encyclopedia and look for the correct one and research. And a lot of times you wouldn't necessarily find what you want. But now you can just push your home button and actually talk to Siri and ask a question, and Siri can let you know what's going on. All right, so some of the disadvantages to technology. This is a big one, is access to inappropriate content. So there is so much out there on the internet, and not all of it is factual, and not all of it is appropriate for young children. So that's one of the big ones that we have to pay attention to when we're considering technology, is what do our children have access to, and is it something that we want them to see or they should be seeing? This is a big one, and this comes to what I said about relationships. Relationships are so important for young children. We know that. We want to have parents who spend time interacting with their children, talking with their children, playing with their children. And simply, when you're utilizing technology, often you're not spending time exploring, playing, and being socially interactive. And this has actually been shown in some early research studies to correlate with delays in learning and social skills. So we really have to pay attention to how much time kids are spending with technology, because it's getting in the way of other important times and interactions with people around them and peers. They've also showed a lot in some research studies that it can cause an increase in distractibility, meaning technology has a lot of stimuli. And so often, we think about pop-ups that happen and apps that have so many things going on at once. I know now I'm really into sports, and a lot of the new arenas are actually being built differently, because they say that most people's attention span is no more than about 2 minutes at this point. And I think a lot of it has to do with we don't have a long attention span anymore. We're easily distracted as a society. Even when you pull up a web page, it's not just the content of the article. You see all these pop-ups on the side, you see these links, you see all these things kind of flashing, and that definitely changes our ability to focus. And that's been shown in children that they get distracted. Another thing could be health and weight issues. If you have a child as they grow older who is constantly sitting in front of the TV or using technology and not getting out and exercising, that definitely can be a disadvantage of the impact of technology. And then behavior. Just like we said at the top with the access to inappropriate content, kids can see things that they shouldn't see. You know, there might be violent content. They could be confused about things that they see. They could try and mimic characters. It doesn't mean that a child is innately changed or bad from watching television, but we definitely need to pay attention because kids are exposed to things that are not age appropriate at times, and unless they have someone there to help explain those things to them, can be really confusing in terms of understanding how to behave and what's okay and what's not okay. And I don't know if I'm sure you'll interrupt me, Debbie, if anyone has any questions.
Sure.
All right. So TV versus computers. So this is something I wanted to point out because I think that there is a bit of a difference between how kids are impacted between watching TV and then using computers. I'm imagining some folks might be familiar with Dr. Bruce Perry. He's done an amazing amount of research on the impact of trauma on children. And the reason that he's so well known is because he talks a lot about how it impacts their brain and their functioning. And he's actually the one, I think, that coined the phrase. I could be giving him credit when it's not due, but I think he's the one who came up with the phrase neurons that are wired together, or neurons that fire together are wired together. And he actually talks a lot about why TV is is not the mode that you'd actually want to choose over computer games and apps. And it's because TV tends to be more passive. And what that means is essentially you can sit in front of the TV and it's not very interactive at all, but there are a lot of things on the computer that are more interactive and that have activities that you can actually repeat. So if you think about a child who's sitting there and watching a TV show, they're sitting and just watching, and they're watching a storyline play out. But in a computer situation or an iPad or an app, oftentimes it's interactive, it's asking you to solve things, you're engaging, you're pushing buttons, and if a child wants to watch it again or do it again, they can. And when we talked about at the beginning, repeated experiences, they lead to more developed connections, neural connections in your brain, so it's more easily accessed for children and the memory is stored. So the more often that a child is experiencing something, the stronger the neural connection in their brain. So it absolutely impacts brain development and stored memories. And what I said in the last slide is TV and computers, though, both pose a concern regarding controlling access to content. I mean, some of the things that kids have access to on the internet, if we're not supervising, you know, they can have exposure, like we talked about, to violence and then destructive concepts. If you think about it, you know, kids can witness things that are racist and misogynistic and age appropriate in terms of sexuality, and we have to monitor those. I think there was it about 6 months ago that YouTube had the big thing where on kids' videos there was a face popping up that was telling them what to do. And I know there were some folks who said that was a hoax, but I definitely think that there can be things that are put into videos for young children that are meant to push them in a certain direction. And so we definitely have to monitor what our children are watching and whether or not it's appropriate for them. And it's a value that we want to push, that we want to pass on to our children. All right, so this is a little bit about the facts and the myths. So I'm going to give you guys a concept, and we're going to talk about whether it's a myth or a fact. All right, so all screen time is damaging to early learning. Well, I kind of answered this a little bit, I think, but that is a myth. So it is not all screen time is damaging to early learning. There are some circumstances where it can actually be really helpful, like we talked about the advantages, especially when it comes to accessibility. So the things that we need to consider, though, is the content age appropriate? Is viewing time limited? And are parents and caregivers involved? One of the things that we talked about with disadvantages was that it can actually get in the way of the time that you spend with your child or that your child spends interacting with others. So if parents and caregivers are involved, they're actually spending time with someone. These are some of these activities that we can do with them where they have a dual experience. So not only do they get the experience with the technology, but they also get their relational experience with the parent and the caregiver. So they're having multiple things happening at once, which are actually building the neural connections in their brain. They're having the information that they're getting from the technology that's building neural connections, but they're also having the experience with a parent and caregiver that is building neural connections. So neural connections meaning they're understanding that relationships are secure, that someone shows up for them. They're getting the feedback back and forth in terms of whether or not it's verbal or some type of communication. If you're sitting there and your child's on your lap, they're getting that intimate connection in terms of touch, which actually promotes serotonin and dopamine chemicals from being released in your brain. And so it actually builds their happiness. So there's a lot happening, but it's super key that parents and caregivers remain involved in this use of screen time and technology. All right, let's go to, is it a fact or a myth? Children are impacted by TV that plays in the background. This was a big one for me because I love sports and I really wanted to have games on in the background, and I wasn't sure, is it a good idea or is it not a good idea? So children are impacted by TV that plays in the background. It's actually a fact. So background noises and lights affect children's language development, cognitive development, and executive functioning. So TV often has loud noises, flashing lights, and noise, and young children already have to sort out and make sense of so much information that it can be really overstimulating to have the TV on in the background. So focusing is easier without the TV. You want to try to limit the TV in the background. You want to make sure you turn it off when no one's watching. Even if no one is watching, it's enough to delay language development. Normally, a parent or a caregiver speaks about 940 words per hour. When the television is on, the number falls to 700. So parents and caregivers, when the TV's on in the background, actually speak less, which if a child isn't being exposed to as much language and vocabulary, that can actually impact their language development. And when we think about executive functioning, if there's so much stimuli for a child to attend to, it can be really hard to kind of figure it out and to get through the murkiness. So it's actually a fact that children are impacted by if the TV is playing in the background. All right. Fact or myth? TV at bedtime can help put children to sleep. So I'm going to point this out. We should also pay attention to this for ourselves as adults, because I definitely think that it can impact adults too. It is a myth. It does not help children go to sleep. Viewing TV within 2 hours of bedtime can actually make it harder for children to fall asleep. And that goes back to the overstimulation, and it arouses their brain. It makes it harder for them to relax. I know a lot of us say, oh, it makes it easier for us. We watch a little TV and we get tired. The backlighting from TV and gaming system screens, it actually impacts our circadian rhythms. And the circadian rhythms are responsible for telling us when it's time to fall asleep, when it's time to wake up. And if we throw our circadian rhythms off, it's going to impact us, and it's actually going to make us harder to fall asleep. I noticed that too with Santiago. If he's watched something before he goes to sleep, he'll talk to us about what it was. We'll hear him in the bedroom talking about the story and the characters. It's activated his brain. He's thinking about it. He's, overstimulated, or not necessarily overstimulated, but he's stimulated, and it's hard for him to fall asleep. All right. Fact or myth? The more interactive a screen experience is, the better it is for kids. So this might be a little confusing because I've talked about computers and technology being interactive. What this exactly means is that there's a lot of things going on a screen. So say they're playing an app and the app has lots of things they can click on, flashing lights, words, songs, just a lot going on. It's actually a myth. And this goes along with kind of what we were talking about before. If there's too much happening for a child, it can interfere with their ability to focus on the storyline. So it's important for us to help them focus on the story itself or the immediate thing going on, and not allow the technology to drive the experience. So when we think about it, it's like, you know, if an app has one or two things to click, that's okay. But if it's just got a plethora of things happening, it's going to be too much for a child to focus and to make sense of all that murkiness. So you want to make sure also that you're paying attention to the apps that kids are on, or the stories, even a story on TV or on an app or YouTube video. You want to make sure that there's not too much going on, that it's going to make sense for the child. All right. Fact or myth, television plays a limited role in learning. All right, so that is actually a fact. So children may learn some concepts from watching educational programming, but they do learn best from hands-on relational experiences. So that's something really to consider is, yes, and I know as a parent, it is really hard when you're tired, you're trying to make dinner when you get home, all these things are happening. Sometimes, you know, it's easier to allow your child to watch some TV, and that's okay, but it has to be a balance. It can't be, you know, 2 hours at night that they're solely sitting in front of the TV, because they're missing out on all those hands-on relational experiences, and you're building the foundation for the rest of their life and the rest of their relational experiences throughout. You know, so if we spend the time with our kids, especially watching the programming, the back and forth that children have with us is going to be more impactful than the TV show that they watch. And then something also to think about is, you know, we want to make sure they're always paying attention, like we talked about before, to the ways that children learn. So if they're simply sitting in front of the television, they're getting the auditory and visual preferences, but they are missing out on the tactile and the kinesthetic opportunities to learn. So they're missing out on, you know, touch. They're not getting that sensation met. They're also, as if it's a child who is sensory seeking and they're seeking proprioceptive or vestibular senses, meaning the pressure on the joints or kind of the balance, you know, those kinds of things happen with exercise and movement of the body. And when you're simply sitting in front of a TV, this can sometimes lead to behavioral challenges in other facets of a child's life, because they're not getting the exposure to the sensory stimulation that they need if they're one of those kind of bump and crash kids. So that's definitely something to think about too, is, you know, do I have a child who's active? Do I have a child who wants to kind of bump into another child or seeks those hugs or that pressure? And if they're solely sitting in front of the TV at home, chances are, if say they go to school or they're doing something during the day and other activities, they're going to have some behavioral challenges, because they're going to be seeking that stimulation even more because they didn't get it when they were at home watching TV. All right, so I wanted to give you guys a little bit on the recommended screen time for the American Academy of Pediatrics. They actually, this is the most recent that I found, but I had heard it might have shifted to even 1-year-old, but that could have been an article. I couldn't find it on their website, so that could have been just something that someone put out. But the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no television. That doesn't mean that they don't recommend video chatting. They do recommend not to have television or video games, that kind of stuff before too. And one of the reasons, so I'm actually just going to pop all these up. It actually takes about 18 months for a baby's brain to develop to the point where the symbols on a screen actually represent something for them in the real world. So if we're showing kids under 18 months TV, they actually don't really fully understand what's on the screen. Their brain hasn't developed to a point where they've actually made some meaning behind what's being represented. One time someone asked me, when I was a mental health consultant, they asked me, what do you think babies dream about? They really, they probably dream about what they know, and that's not a lot. So you think about a 5-month-old, they probably dream about milk. They probably dream about their hands because they're playing with their hands, looking at their hands, but their brain hasn't formed to a point to have much complexity. And that's the same when you think about screens. That's so much stimulation, that's so many things being thrown at them at once. They really can't make sense of it. And even children to understand the concept of pretend, that is something actually that doesn't form until I would say closer to 3.5, for a child to be able to understand that what they see on the screen is pretend, and it's not necessarily something that's represented in their life. And I think that that is a big thing for us to pay attention to when we're considering what's age appropriate for a child. Do they fully understand that this is not something that actually might happen in their life? Okay, so these are the actual recommendations for screen time. Birth to 18 months, you want to avoid all screen media, phones, tablets, TVs, and computers. But when you talk about phones, it's absolutely okay to FaceTime, that kind of stuff, because like we said before, that's one of the advantages, that it can actually connect family members or friends or people that are important to a child when they're not close by. I think about that a lot for families who potentially are split because of immigration. You know, I've worked with a lot of families where one family member might still be in Mexico, and FaceTime is a great way to keep in contact with that family member and to be able to get two modes of communicate, or two modes of learning, two modes of exposure, the visual and the auditory. 18 months to 2 years, it's okay to introduce young children, but they say to high quality children's media. So that's media like Paw Patrol, or where there's problem solving, and they're asking kids questions and to solve a puzzle. So it's an interactive form as well. But you want to watch it with them, and they have to understand what they're seeing. So you want to be present with them so that they can ask questions about what they're seeing so that you can explain it. One of the things that's has always fascinated me when I've done therapy with young children is children will make up a story, and the story often, or a narrative, is pieced together on what they can make of it, and it's often missing lots of pieces. So when I worked with children who had a traumatic event happen or something like that go on, sometimes after developing a good relationship, we might talk about what that event was, and the narrative that I would get from the children was not anything about what it really was. I mean, there was this child that I worked with who had actually, his mom she had had the children taken away a couple times. This child was 6, but when he was 4 years old, his mom was pulled over because she was driving while intoxicated, and he and his 2 other siblings were in the car. They hadn't been put into car seats, and the child I was working with actually had felt ill and had threw up right before his mom got pulled over. And, obviously from an adult perspective, his mom should not have been driving drunk. That's not safe. She didn't have the kids in a car seat. That's not safe. Yeah, we understand why her children were put in danger and why CPS thought that they needed to be removed. But in this little kid's mind, he had made up the story that he had thrown up, and that had caused his mom to get pulled over by the police, and they were taken away because he got sick. So that was actually the story that he had formed in his head, and no one had ever talked to him about it. So one of the things that we were able to do through therapy was actually to suss out and to create a new narrative and to help him to understand that it was not his fault. Nothing that happened was his fault, because here he was feeling all this guilt that everything had happened because of him, that he had been removed, his brothers and sisters had been removed, that this was all his doing. So I think that that's something that is so key to this, is when kids are witnessing things on a screen or in an app or anything like that, that we're there to help them understand it, and that we're there to have that dialogue, because otherwise kids will make up some kind of story. So 2 to 5 years, you want to limit screen time to 1 hour a day of high quality programs that are designed for kids. So not adult programs, but designed for children. You want to watch it with them. You want to explain what they're seeing and how it applies to the world around them. Okay? All right. So ways to limit screen time. These are pretty simple, but they're things that we don't always think about. Keep the TV, computer out of sight. At our house, we actually put the laptop in a case and put it up on the top of a shelf. Put the TV and computers in rooms not used by children. Kids don't need a TV in their room. If you have a TV in a central place, that's great, but they don't need a TV in their room, and they don't need an iPad in their room when it's time to go to bed. Replace screen time with fun, interactive activities. Get outside, do things that are fun, color, make paper airplanes, try and do things that are different so that we don't necessarily just sit in front of a screen. Like I said, play outside. Music and dance, that's absolutely fine. I know a lot of times people will show music videos on YouTube to their kids so that they can dance. I actually think it's great to just have the music on without the video. I think it's great to see how kids explore their own creativity and their own way to dance and their own way to move. And then another great thing is if your child is able to, have them come into the kitchen, let them set up the table, let them cook with you. You know, there are certain ways that you can kind of make accommodations and adapt things so that your children can help you. All right, and then age-appropriate programs. So this is something that I kind of touched on already, but I wanted to make sure that I put out there as well. You want to pick programs where the characters actually interact with your child, meaning that they might directly speak to your child for a second and ask a question. I know Mickey Mouse Clubhouse sometimes does that with O'Toodles when they need a helper. Mickey will actually put up, you know, what do you think we would need to help to get through this situation? And they'll put up the 4 different things that they can choose from, and they'll give a child a second to actually name what item they think would help in the situation. So that to the next one, characters ask children to participate in the show in some way. Word World is a great one. Super Why, they actually will search for letters together or build words, and they'll actually have the kids repeat the word out loud or repeat the letters. And when there's a strong storyline and a storybook structure, so meaning the beginning, middle, and an end. If a show doesn't necessarily have those components, it can be really hard for a child to understand as well. And these are actually skills, my wife is a first grade teacher, that she's often trying to teach children, is that there's always a beginning, middle, and end in a story or something that they need to write, so that they're understanding the structure of kind of writing and stories and all that kind of stuff. All right, and then more tips, watch it together. We've talked about that quite a bit. You know, your child learns the most from interactions that they have with you. The conversations that you have can be so much more educational than mobile apps. Even though mobile apps at times are designed for learning, but there's so much enrichment that happens from a conversation where a child gets to ask pointed questions. Your child might point to something that interests them. You can talk about it. It's connected to the feeling of being together, of being loved and supported. So ask questions and talk about what you're watching. If something comes up in the show, you can say, oh, what do you think's happening there? Or why do you think so-and-so did that? And then answer their questions. You know, they might come back and say something, definitely depends on the age of a child, but if they ask a question back, answer. And point out and name things. So this might be for some of the younger children who don't have as much language, or maybe someone who is nonverbal. Point out and name things that you see on the screen and then narrate. It's similar to what we do when we're actually working with children to help promote social skills and understanding of who they are and feelings. So, you know, you could point out, oh, the bear looks so hungry, or the bear looks really sad. You know, I think it's great to help children to understand feelings, and sometimes it takes us labeling them and explaining them for a child to see that. And you want to connect what children see on TV or on YouTube or in the apps to their real lives. You want to help them understand how some of these things can be generalized to things they're experiencing at school. Or, you know, Daniel the Tiger, Debbie and I were talking about Daniel the Tiger too. Daniel the Tiger experiences a lot of things that are similar to what kids might go through who are usually around like 2 to maybe 5 years old. He has some great ideas on how to handle things. You know, there's this one episode where he gets upset with his dad and he counts to 4 and takes a deep breath. And that helps him to regulate and helps him to kind of calm himself down. You can absolutely use a situation like that and relate it to something that a child's experienced. We've done that with my son before, where we say, oh my gosh, you know, that Daniel kind of looks like how you did earlier when you didn't want to clean up. Wow, and look, he's counting to 4 and he's taking a deep breath. Why don't we try it now too? So it's definitely ways to bring it in and to relate it to things that children have experienced. Point out and name objects in real life that he or she sees on the TV, phone, or tablet. You know, my son does that himself. He'll be like, I saw that earlier, or this and that. But it's something you guys can bring up too. And then you could say things like, do you remember we watched a show about a postman or a mail carrier this morning? Oh, there he is coming to bring our mail. So you can kind of tie in those experiences beyond television to what they're doing in everyday life, which will actually enhance the experience. And then be active. We actually use YouTube. There's Animal Action, and it does animal movements. And so I'll use that sometimes to, especially when it's raining, to get up and to get moving around. You can act out a story, use puppets. So there are different ways that you can use these kind of outlets and this technology to enhance situations, because you can't always go outside and play. I mean, right now it's raining in San Francisco. It's been drizzly. So, you have to find things to do indoors. And I think it's a great way to utilize technology to help bring in new activities that you can do. All right, I went really fast today, which I'm very proud of myself because I usually run out of time. But does anyone have any questions on things that were presented today or anything that they'd like to put out there?
All right, so type your questions into the question panel. We did have Debbie suggested another resource called Common Sense Media, which she says is a great place for parents to find rated quality media.
It does, and it actually, so you can go on and it'll break apart a TV show, and it'll actually show kind of what are the benefits of the show, what are the age groups that they believe it's appropriate for, and you can actually access it in English and Spanish.
Great. I was very sad about the background TV information.
I know it's hard.
I have 6-month-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and 4-year-old grandchildren, so that was sad. But I will tell you a Daniel Tiger story. My husband went with my daughter for shots, and they just seen the one about Daniel Tiger getting a shot, and he reminded him about that, and it actually worked. So so here's a question: what can a parent do if their children are already addicted to technology?
It's never too late to set limits. I know it's hard, but that would be my best thing that I could say is it's never too late to set limits. I think depending on the age of children and their cognitive abilities, I think I'd want to incorporate them in the process of setting new limits. So having a conversation about how much we use technology, what do you think are the benefits of you using your device? I'm not quite sure how old the kids are, but if they're younger, you're obviously going to have to set the limits yourself, and maybe start by reducing time until you can get to a point that seems right for you guys. But there's only one opportunity in life to kind of get this situated, and that's one of the things that's hard as parents, that we just sometimes have to say, we can't do as much as we're doing. If it's a teenager, obviously it's going to be a lot harder. Teens are hard in general, but that's why as much as you can incorporate them in the process of deciding what's going to work and what's not, and really brainstorming what are some things we can do instead, and talking about how what kinds of activities you guys can do, maybe even making a list of different things that you'd like to do together. And we we do this at our house sometimes, where we'll write a list of all the things we want to do. We'll cut them up into little singular things, put them in a hat and pull one out and make a decision on what we want to do. But yeah, I think it's really just have to set those limits and kind of work backwards. And it's not like it's for a foregone conclusion that you're too far gone. Absolutely not, because that's one of the cool things about the brain is as soon as you start to shift things, you build new neural connections. So you just have to be consistent with it and essentially look at rewiring your brain, not to solely go towards that technology, but to go towards other things.
So a follow-up question to that, is there a therapy or intervention program for that? So I'm guessing maybe specific to that.
To technology, yeah. It's such a new field that I have a few friends who are actually working as therapists now, working with young adults to look at technology and addiction, whether it be to gaming or things like that. So it is, and they're using a lot of similar principles to what they use for substance abuse work, where it's really looking at harm reduction. Kind of what I was saying is that you can't necessarily quit cold turkey, but it's looking at how do we reduce the harm. So really making kind of an assessment of, in a family, what is the impact of technology on our family? How is it impacting our relationships? How is it impacting our child's functioning? Are they not wanting to go to school? Are they not interacting with peers as much? So you'd want to really look at, like, what is the impact first? And what are some areas where we can cut back and reduce our use of technology so that we can enhance some of our other skills or some of the things that it's negatively impacting? So it's very similar to an approach with substance use. There's not a lot of folks doing it, but it is a new and emerging kind of field for therapists to be approaching it in that way. So I think that if someone wanted to go and felt like they really needed to get additional support and services, that they would look to someone who has an addiction background, even if it's not technology and gaming and that kind of stuff, that some of the same principles could work.
Would
Is
there
that
be anybody that our kiddos are working with, like a that they might already have in their lives that might have a behaviorist or is there anybody that?
Well, I think it'd be, yes, if they're working up with behaviorists. So one of the reasons, I mean, I'd really want to get behind too, what are the reasons for the use of technology? Like, is my child using technology like, are they having anxiety in social situations, so they want to do things on their own? So that would be something that you'd look at. Well, how do I enhance their social skills, and how do I help reduce their anxiety? So I think that's key too, is like, why are they using technology, and what is it serving a purpose for? So I think you could work with someone in that way, to be able to improve social skills and that kind of stuff. And then when you're thinking about kids who, I don't like the word defiant, but kids who have a hard time with limits, yes, you could work with a behavior therapist in that way. That might be something that's coming up around technology. A child is refusing to put an iPad away or something like that. So you could use already existing services to kind of build on how do you set limits. So it just depends on the extent and what the technology, like what it's replacing. So kids are using it for some reason. How is that? What is that reason, and what purpose is it serving? And is there some type of replacement behavior that I could put in place that would be more appropriate and not impact them as negatively? So yeah, so an ABA therapist with the social skills piece, if they have one, an existing therapist. I know a lot of schools now have therapeutic behavior specialists who will come in and sometimes set up goals for kids. Your IEP might have some work with a psychologist or someone like that. So that could be looking at, what are some replacement behaviors or some coping skills that my child might need, because like I was saying, it could be anxiety related, it could be lack of social skills. Depression could lead to more use of technology to kind of use it as an escape. So what are other ways? Does a child like to read? Could I read with them? What are other ways to kind of disconnect a bit? So I think a lot of it depends on kind of that assessment of what's behind this, and then you could kind of figure out what are the appropriate services.
Great.
Does that make sense? I hope.
It did to me. The question, the asker can let us know if there's anything else here in our last little bit. We use other technology. We use Alexa to set the timer on Daniel Tiger. So we'll have Alexa set a 15-minute Daniel Tiger timer. It still seems to work because they're little, but
Yeah, for young children, timers are huge. I don't think we utilize them enough, and that could be a sand timer or your phone timer. But that actually was really helpful with Santiago when he wasn't wanting to stop something. Kids don't necessarily fully have a concept of time until they're older, but he knew when I say 5 minutes left and then the timer goes off, that it's done. The activity is done. And so that really helped us to set limits. We also use the strategy, you might be really sad when the timer goes off. What can you do? And we've taught him that he can come over and get a hug. He can be really sad, and that's okay. And he can come get a hug. And hopefully that will help him to feel better, but he still might be sad. And that's something that we have to live with too. And I know it's super hard, especially depending on the cognitive level of each child and how much they fully understand something. But it is sad to say, but the world is full of very disappointing things, and it's okay to allow kids to feel disappointed. I think what really depends on how we respond to them and how we help them through that's key. And so whatever we can offer to be there for our child as they go through disappointment, I think is really important.
That's true. Yeah, the 2-year-old laid down on the floor and said, "Alexa, don't see me." So Janice says there's the campaign for hang on, it just moved. The campaign for commercial-free childhood has a good brochure for families with preschoolers called Healthy Kids in a Digital World that's free to download or order for the cost of shipping only. Thanks, Janice.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff that I found when I was putting this together was off of 0 to 3. They had a lot of information, and then, like I was saying, Dr. Bruce Perry, because he does so much research on the brain and neural connections. So there's a lot of information out there. And that sounds like an amazing resource too, because I know a lot of this you guys are going to want to be able to translate to the families that you serve and be able to get that information out there. I do want to reiterate too, though, that there are advantages to technology, especially when it comes to assisted technology. And so, I want to make sure that I think the big piece is when children are using assistive technology, they're using it with help from caregivers initially, and there's so many benefits from it, but we're really involved in the process. And I hope that theme came out throughout this, is we just need to be involved. And I know it's really hard because we live busy lives, but as much as we can be involved in the technological side of things for our children, to explain things, to make sure we're monitoring content, those are going to be key, because not only is that helping us with this content piece, but it's allowing us to be interactive with our children, which allows that relational piece to happen.
Right.
Okay.
And Debbie reminds us that there's a lot of built-in features on tablets to help restrict and limit time. That would require me trying to figure out how to do that, Debbie, so that's probably going to be I'm sure the rest of you all know how to do it, but
It's what do I do? I Google everything. If I
yeah.
don't know how to do it, just go into your search engine, type in how do I limit blah 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 on the app, blah blah blah, and they'll tell you in a second. You go to the settings, you do this, 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 and this. So, when I don't know something, I just Google it, which is a benefit of
There you
technology,
go.
that there are ways to show us how to stop our children from seeing things.
True. All right. Well, thank you, Karen. That was very eye-opening, a little depressing for me, um, but good. I knew all the information in the back of my head. It just was good to hear somebody tell me.
Okay.
So you guys will get a survey. If you would fill that out for us, it really helps with planning for us for the future. And you should also get a follow-up email that will give you a certificate that you can print to show that you did this professional development activity today, so that you can start building your own portfolio of trainings and that kind of thing you've done to share with your supervisor or the powers that be. I think that's it. You'll get we will post the recording and the PowerPoint on the website. We got a little delay now. We were having to bring in some new staff to take care of all that IT fancy stuff for us. So there's a little delay in getting the things posted. But if you need something, if you need the PowerPoint or the recording, let me know. I can send them to you separately. If you've got, somewhere you want to show it or something like that. So Karen, as always, fabulous, very informative. I really appreciate your sharing all of our knowledge, your knowledge, not our knowledge, because I don't have any in this, but it was great. And
Well, thank you, and I do believe you all have knowledge. So,
well,
but
thank
thank
you.
you.
All right, so we're going to end the webinar for today. You guys all have a great holiday season, and I guess we won't meet again together until 2020. So this will end our webinar for today, and we'll see you then.